The rifle range fell silent. Every Marine stopped what they were doing as the sound of that impossible shot echoed across the desert training grounds. 2,000 yards, a target that most seasoned snipers wouldn't even attempt. And there she stood, this quiet woman they'd been calling just another civilian contractor, lowering a Barrett M82 caliber rifle with the kind of casual precision that only comes from years of classified missions nobody talks about. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who'd been running shooters off this range for 15 years, just stared at the spotting scope. That's a perfect center mass hit. His voice cracked slightly. The other Marines gathered around, their earlier dismissive comments about letting civilians use their equipment now hanging awkwardly in the desert air. What they didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell had been making shots like this when most of them were still in high school. What they couldn't have guessed was that the unassuming woman in contractor gear had spent 8 years as one of the military's most classified assets, taking shots that changed the course of operations across 3 different theaters of war. The morning sun blazed over Camp Pendleton as Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the dusty contractor van, her worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. At first glance, she looked like any other civilian support staff arriving for another routine assignment. Medium height, athletic build, hidden beneath practical khaki pants and a simple polo shirt bearing the logo of her cybersecurity firm. Her brown hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and her eyes, a striking shade of green, took in the sprawling Marine base with the kind of careful observation that most people missed entirely. What the Marines' loading equipment nearby couldn't see was the way her gaze automatically cataloged sightlines, identified cover positions, and noted the wind patterns affecting the flags scattered across the compound. These weren't the habits of a typical IT contractor. These were instincts carved deep by years of training that officially never happened in places that didn't exist on any public map. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached with the kind of measured politeness reserved for necessary evils. Civilians on base always complicated things, even when they were here to upgrade network security systems that desperately needed upgrading. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. I'll be your liaison during your stay here. His handshake was firm but brief, professional courtesy with just enough distance to establish the hierarchy. Your quarters are in Building C, and your work area has been prepared in the communications center. Sarah nodded, shouldering her bag with an ease that suggested it weighed considerably more than it appeared. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. I appreciate the accommodation. How long do you think it'll take to get my security clearance verified for the classified systems? The question was routine, but something in her tone made Rodriguez pause. Most contractors asked about internet access or meal schedules. This one was already thinking 3 steps ahead into the technical requirements of her mission. As they walked across the compound, passing Marines engaged in various training exercises, Sarah found herself unconsciously adjusting her pace to match Rodriguez's military bearing. Old habits died hard, and she'd spent too many years matching the rhythm of combat boots on foreign soil to walk any other way. The sound of rifle fire from the distant range caused her to tilt her head slightly, her ears automatically processing the difference between M4 carbines and the heavier reports of designated marksman rifles. Rodriguez noticed the subtle head movement. Range training, he explained unnecessarily. We've got some of our best shooters qualifying for advanced sniper school this week. They're putting in extra hours trying to improve their long-distance accuracy. There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from working with Marines who pushed themselves beyond standard requirements. What's their current effective range for qualifications? Sarah asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. She caught Rodriguez's surprised look and quickly added, just curious. I've always been interested in marksmanship, though I've never had much opportunity to practice. It was a careful lie, delivered with the kind of casual deflection she'd perfected over years of maintaining cover identities. The truth was that Sarah Mitchell had been responsible for some of the longest confirmed kills in modern military history, shots taken from distances that pushed the absolute limits of both equipment and human capability. But Sarah Mitchell, the classified sniper, had died 8 years ago in a bureaucratic shuffle of black budget programs and need-to-know restrictions. The woman walking across Camp Pendleton was just another contractor with a security clearance and a talent for computer networks. The next 3 days fell into a predictable routine. Sarah arrived at the communications center before dawn, worked methodically through outdated security protocols and vulnerable network configurations, and quietly impressed the technical staff with her thorough understanding of both civilian and military cyber defense systems. She ate meals alone, kept conversations professional, and gave every appearance of being exactly what her paperwork claimed she was. But routines have a way of creating opportunities, and on the fourth morning, those opportunities collided with Sarah's carefully maintained cover story in a way that would change everything. She'd finished an early diagnostic run on the base's primary servers and decided to take a longer route back to her quarters, a path that happened to wind past the rifle range where Rodriguez's Marines were conducting their advanced training. The range was busy, with Marines rotating through various shooting positions under the watchful eyes of their instructors. Sarah paused at the observation area, telling herself she was just taking a short break before returning to work. In reality, she was drawn by the familiar sounds and rhythms of serious marksmanship training, the careful coaching voices and precise rifle reports that had once been the soundtrack to her professional life. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spotted her from across the range and walked over, sweat staining his camouflage uniform from a morning of instruction. "Ms. Mitchell, taking a break from the computer work?" His tone was friendly enough, but Sarah detected the slight protective edge that military personnel often developed around civilians observing their training. "Just enjoying the morning air," she replied, then nodded toward the Marines on the firing line. "They look like they know what they're doing out there." It was an understatement. Even from her position in the observation area, she could see that these Marines had been well trained, their shooting positions solid, and their movements efficient. Rodriguez's chest swelled with obvious pride. "These are some of our finest marksmen. They're preparing for advanced sniper training, working on extending their effective range out to 800 yards consistently." He paused, studying the targets downrange through binoculars. Of course, real sniper work goes well beyond that, but 800 yards is respectable for designated marksman roles. Sarah nodded appreciatively, but something in her expression must have suggested more than casual interest, because Rodriguez lowered his binoculars and looked at her more carefully. "You mentioned being interested in marksmanship yesterday. Ever done any shooting yourself?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Sarah recognized the subtle challenge beneath it. Military personnel often tested civilians this way, gauging whether their interest was genuine or just curiosity. "A little," she said carefully. "Nothing serious, mostly just recreational shooting at civilian ranges." Another lie, but a necessary one. The truth was classified at levels that required congressional oversight to even acknowledge. She'd never been to a civilian range in her life. Her marksmanship training had taken place in facilities that didn't appear on any public maps, under instructors whose names were redacted from official records. Rodriguez smiled, the expression carrying just enough condescension to be irritating. "Well, if you're interested in seeing how real shooting is done, you're welcome to observe. We've got some impressive equipment out here, including a Barrett .50 caliber for extreme long-range work." He gestured toward a massive rifle mounted on a bipod at the far end of the range. Its distinctive profile, unmistakable even at a distance. Sarah's pulse quickened involuntarily. She knew that rifle intimately, had carried its weight across desert compounds and mountain ridgelines, had felt its powerful recoil against her shoulder in situations where missing meant mission failure and the deaths of fellow service members. But she forced her expression to remain neutral, mildly curious rather than professionally familiar. "Impressive," she said. "What kind of range do you get with something like that?" She already knew the answer, of course. She'd pushed Barrett .50 caliber rifles well beyond their theoretical limits, making shots that existed only in classified after-action reports that would never see public release. "Effective range is typically around 1,800 yards for most shooters," Rodriguez explained, warming to his subject. "Though the theoretical maximum is considerably further. We've got targets set up out to 2,000 yards, but honestly, very few people can make consistent hits at that distance. It requires perfect conditions, exceptional equipment maintenance, and years of specialized training." One of the Marines on the firing line, a lance corporal whose name tape read Patterson, overheard the conversation and approached with the casual swagger of someone confident in his abilities. "Staff sergeant's being modest," he said with a grin. "None of us have managed a clean hit at 2,000 yards yet." But we're getting close. Johnson here got within 6 inches last week. He nodded toward another Marine who was adjusting the scope on his rifle. Sarah studied the distant targets, her trained eye automatically calculating wind speed, atmospheric pressure, and a dozen other variables that affected long-range shooting. The conditions were actually quite good, with minimal wind and clear visibility. Under different circumstances, with different credentials, she would have considered it an ideal day for extreme range work. 2,000 yards, she mused aloud. That's quite a distance. She paused, then asked with carefully manufactured curiosity, would it be possible to take a closer look at the Barrett? I've never seen one up close. Patterson's grin widened. Sure thing. Most civilians find it pretty intimidating once they realize what it's capable of. There was good-natured condescension in his voice, the kind that came from years of watching visitors react to serious military hardware with mixtures of awe and nervousness. They walked toward the Barrett position, Sarah maintaining the slightly hesitant pace of someone unfamiliar with rifle ranges, while internally cataloging every detail of the weapon setup. The Barrett was well maintained, properly zeroed based on the adjustment settings she could see, and equipped with high-quality optics that would be more than adequate for extreme range work. This particular rifle has an effective range of over a mile in the right hands, Rodriguez explained, clearly enjoying his role as instructor. The .50 caliber round maintains lethal energy well beyond what most people would consider possible. Of course, actually hitting targets at that range requires skills that take years to develop. Sarah nodded appropriately, running her eyes over the weapon with the kind of careful attention that she hoped looked like fascination rather than professional assessment. Everything about the rifle is familiar, from the feel of the grip to the precise click of the safety mechanism. She'd carried this exact model through 3 different combat zones, had broken it down and reassembled it in complete darkness, had made shots with similar weapons that had altered the course of classified operations. The recoil must be substantial, she observed, another carefully neutral comment that revealed nothing of her actual experience with the platform. Definitely, Patterson agreed. Takes some getting used to. Most people are surprised by how manageable it is once you learn proper positioning, but there's no denying it packs a punch. He paused, studying Sarah with renewed interest. You seem pretty comfortable around firearms for someone who only shoots recreationally. It was a perceptive observation, and Sarah realized she'd been unconsciously displaying familiarity that went beyond casual interest. She'd been too comfortable, too natural in her movements around the weapon. Years of operational security training kicked in, and she forced a slight self-conscious laugh. I suppose I watch too many military documentaries, she said. Makes me feel like I know more than I actually do. It was exactly the kind of deflection that civilians often used, simultaneously self-deprecating and explanatory. The conversation might have ended there, filed away as another encounter between curious civilian and proud Marines, except that Johnson chose that moment to attempt another shot at the 2,000-yard target. The rifle's report echoed across the range, and all eyes turned to the spotting scope to assess the results. Close, called the spotter. About 8 inches low and to the right. There was disappointment in his voice, the frustration of someone who'd been working toward a goal that remained just out of reach. Sarah found herself studying the wind flags downrange, automatically processing the environmental factors that affected the shot. The wind had shifted slightly since Johnson's last attempt, and the mirage pattern suggested atmospheric conditions that would require adjustment to both elevation and windage. Without thinking, she murmured, the winds picked up about 2 miles per hour from the southeast, and there's a thermal layer causing deflection about halfway to the target. The observation was precise, technical, and delivered with the kind of casual confidence that came from years of reading environmental conditions under operational pressure. It was also completely inconsistent with someone whose shooting experience consisted of recreational visits to civilian ranges. Rodriguez turned to stare at her, his expression shifting from polite interest to sharp attention. That's remarkably specific for someone with limited shooting experience. His voice carried a new edge, the tone of someone who'd just heard something that didn't fit the established narrative. Patterson and Johnson had both stopped what they were doing, their attention now focused entirely on the civilian contractor who just demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond casual interest. The moment stretched uncomfortably, Sarah realizing that her operational instincts had just compromised her carefully maintained cover. The silence was broken by Patterson's voice, carrying a challenge that was half jest and half serious test. "Well then, expert, why don't you show us how it's done?" He gestured toward the Barrett with the kind of casual dare that Marines specialized in, the invitation that was really a challenge wrapped in humor. Every alarm bell in Sarah's mind screamed warnings about operational security, about maintaining cover, about the risks of revealing capabilities that were supposed to remain buried in classified files. But another part of her, the part that had spent years taking impossible shots under impossible conditions, whispered that maybe it was time to stop pretending to be less than she was. She looked at the Barrett, then at the distant target that represented everything she'd once been, everything she'd walked away from when her official service had ended in bureaucratic reshuffling and black budget cuts. 2,000 yards, a shot she'd made dozens of times under conditions far more challenging than these perfect training circumstances. "I wouldn't want to interfere with your training," she said carefully, but something in her voice had changed. The deflection was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that sounded almost like acceptance of a challenge she couldn't quite bring herself to refuse. Rodriguez was studying her with the kind of intense focus that came from years of reading people in high-stakes situations. "It's not interference if you can teach us something," he said slowly. "The question is, can you?" The words hung in the desert air like a gauntlet thrown down, a moment where pretense would either continue or shatter completely. Sarah looked once more at the Barrett, then at the Marines whose skeptical expressions were mixed with genuine curiosity. After 8 years of hiding behind civilian credentials and contractor clearances, of pretending her most significant skills were related to network security rather than precision marksmanship, she found herself faced with a choice that would reveal everything or preserve nothing. "All right," she said quietly, moving toward the rifle with fluid motions that immediately betrayed years of familiarity with the platform. "But I'll need to make some adjustments first." Her hands moved to the scope settings with practiced efficiency, making corrections based on environmental factors she'd been unconsciously calculating since arriving at the range. The Marines watched in growing amazement as Sarah's demeanor shifted from hesitant civilian to confident professional. Her movements around the weapon were economical and precise, each adjustment deliberate and informed by experience that couldn't be faked. She settled into a shooting position with the kind of natural comfort that took years to develop, her breathing automatically falling into the rhythm that every trained marksman learned. 2,000 yards, she murmured, more to herself than to the watching Marines. "Haven't done this in a while." It was the first completely honest thing she'd said since arriving at Camp Pendleton, and something in her voice made Rodriguez realize they were about to witness something extraordinary. The shot, when it came, was preceded by a stillness that seemed to encompass the entire range. Sarah's breathing slowed, her body settling into perfect alignment with the weapon, her finger finding the trigger, with the kind of gentle precision that separated professionals from enthusiasts. The Barrett's massive report split the morning air, and every eye turned to the Spaten G-scope for confirmation of what they'd just witnessed. "Perfect center mass," Rodriguez whispered, his voice carrying disbelief and dawning recognition. "Dead center at 2,000 yards. He looked up from the scope, his expression transformed by understanding. "Who the hell are you?" Sarah rose from the shooting position, her movements carrying the satisfied fluidity of someone who just confirmed that old skills remained sharp despite years of disuse. The pretense was over, the careful cover story blown apart by a single impossible shot that no civilian contractor should have been able to make. "Someone who used to do this for a living," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of operations she couldn't discuss and missions that officially never happened. "A long time ago, in places that don't exist on maps you're allowed to see." The revelation changed everything at Camp Pendleton. Word spread quickly through the Marine community about the civilian contractor who'd made an impossible shot, then quietly returned to her cybersecurity work as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Sarah Mitchell became something of a legend, the mysterious woman whose true capabilities remained largely classified but whose single demonstration had earned permanent respect from some of the military's finest marksmen. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would later say that watching Sarah handle that Barrett was like seeing a master craftsman return to familiar tools after years away from the workshop. The comfort, the precision, the absolute confidence, these weren't things that could be learned from documentaries or recreational shooting. These were skills carved by operational necessity, refined under pressures that most people couldn't imagine. Sarah completed her network security assignment 3 weeks later, having upgraded Camp Pendleton's cyber defenses to levels that impressed even the technical specialists who'd thought they understood advanced digital security. But her real legacy wasn't found in improved firewalls or enhanced encryption protocols. It was found in the Marines who'd learned that expertise comes in many forms, that heroes often hide behind ordinary job titles, and that the most extraordinary capabilities are sometimes possessed by the most unassuming people. Before she left, Patterson approached her with the kind of respectful curiosity that had replaced his earlier casual dismissiveness. "Ma'am, that shot you made, how many others like that have you taken?" The question carried weight, an understanding that they'd witnessed just the smallest glimpse of a much larger story. Sarah smiled, shouldering her duffel bag with the same practiced ease she'd displayed on arrival. "Enough," she said simply. "More than enough." It was an answer that revealed nothing and everything, acknowledgement without detail, confirmation without compromise of the operational security that still governed much of her past. The Marines who'd witnessed that incredible shot would carry the story with them throughout their careers, sharing it in the way that military personnel share legends of exceptional skill and unexpected revelation. They'd learned something important that day about assumptions and appearances, about the hidden depths that exist in seemingly ordinary people, and about the fact that true expertise never really fades. It just waits for the right moment to resurface. Honor those who serve in silence, whose greatest achievements remain forever classified, whose sacrifices go unrecognized except by the few who know the truth. If this story of hidden heroes and revealed excellence inspired you, subscribe for more tales of the extraordinary people who walk among us, carrying secrets of service that shaped our world in ways we'll never fully know. Because sometimes the most incredible stories belong to the people who seem most ordinary until the moment they show us who they really are.